The Guardians of Peace. The Galactic Assembly Hall on Centauri Prime gleamed under the light of 3 stars, its crystalline dome designed to reflect the harmony of the 57 species that had maintained peace for 3 centuries. At the center of the Grand Chamber stood Commander Elara Reed, the sole human representative, her dark uniform a stark contrast against the colorful attire of the alien diplomats surrounding her. "The motion to exclude humanity from the Draxian Trade Summit is passed," announced High Counselor Vexla, her translucent tendrils rippling with what Reed recognized as satisfaction. "This assembly remains concerned about human unpredictability." Reed maintained her composure, though her jaw tightened. "The Terran Confederacy accepts the Assembly's decision," she said, her voice steady despite the familiar sting of rejection. "However, I must once again request that the Council reconsider our intelligence reports regarding unusual activity in the Outer Rim." A dismissive wave of tentacles from Vexla. "Commander Reed, your species' tendency toward paranoia is well documented. The Outer Rim disturbances are simply ion storms, as our scientists have repeatedly concluded." As the assembly adjourned, Reed made her way through the grand corridors, nodding politely to diplomats who maintained a respectful, perhaps fearful, distance. 300 years had passed since the Treaty of Proxima, when humanity had agreed to withdraw from galactic warfare. 3 centuries since the last human warship had engaged in combat. Yet still, the other species kept their distance, treating humans as dangerous curiosities best kept contained. Few living beings had ever witnessed humans at war. The galaxy's long memory preserved only stories of a young, impulsive species that fought with a ferocity and innovation that terrified even the oldest civilizations. Humanity's brief entrance onto the galactic stage had been marked by quick victories against aggressors and swift, decisive actions that older species found disturbing. The humans didn't fight by established rules. They adapted too quickly. They took risks no sane species would consider. And so the treaty had been signed. Earth would remain protected, autonomous, and involved in peaceful trade and research. In return, humans agreed to dismantle their military fleets and withdraw from all military operations beyond their solar system. A fair exchange for a young species, or so it had seemed at the time. Back in her private quarters, Reed activated her secure terminal, the holographic display showing Admiral Helena Zhang's weathered face. "They dismissed our reports again," Reed said without preamble. Zhang nodded, unsurprised. "Expected. The Council has grown complacent after centuries of peace. They'd forgotten what it means to face existential threats." "The activity in the Outer Rim is increasing," Reed countered, pulling up sensor readings showing unusual gravitational distortions near abandoned mining systems. "Whatever's coming through those spatial rifts isn't natural, Admiral. The energy signatures match nothing in our databases. Or they match something too old to be in anyone's database," John replied, her expression grim. "Our deep space probes captured this footage 12 hours ago." The display shifted to show a massive structure, if it could be called that, emerging from what appeared to be a tear in space itself. Unlike the sleek, organic designs favored by most galactic civilizations, this construct was angular, impossibly black, and seemed to bend light around its edges. "What am I looking at?" Reed asked, leaning closer. "Something that doesn't belong in our universe," Zhang answered. "The energy readings are off the charts, and the thing is generating gravimetric distortions that shouldn't be possible. More importantly, it's not alone. We've detected similar anomalies appearing throughout the Outer Rim, all following a pattern." Reed studied the projection showing the anomalies' locations. "They're creating a perimeter, containing something, or preparing to contain us." "Precisely. And based on their current trajectory, they'll reach Paxari space within 2 weeks." Reed felt her blood run cold. The Paxari were among the most peaceful species in the galaxy, philosophers and artists who had been Earth's first alien allies. "The Council needs to mobilize immediately." "The Council," Zhang said with a hint of bitterness. Hasn't fought a war in centuries. Their response fleets are ceremonial at best. By the time they acknowledge the threat, it will be too late. What about us? Reed asked the question that hung between them. The Treaty of Proxima forbids us from military intervention, Zhang finished. But it doesn't forbid preparation. Project Lazarus was never dismantled, Commander. Just hidden. Reed's eyes widened. Project Lazarus, the contingency plan developed in the early days after the treaty, designed to rapidly restore Earth's military capabilities if the need ever arose. It was supposed to be theoretical, a paper exercise to satisfy the hawks in government who feared the treaty left Earth vulnerable. Admiral, if the Council discovers we've been maintaining military readiness, then they'll be angry at us for saving their lives, Zhang interrupted. I'm not suggesting we break the treaty, Commander. Not yet. But I am ordering you to return to Earth immediately. When this threat materializes, the galaxy will need what only we can provide. Reed nodded slowly. And what's that, exactly? Zhang's face hardened, lines deepening around her eyes. The thing they've always feared about us, Commander. Our capacity for warfare. Within 24 hours, Reed had discreetly departed Centauri Prime, her diplomatic shuttle making the jump to hyperspace with a filed flight plan for routine consultation on Earth. What the Council didn't know was that her shuttle carried detailed scans of the spatial anomalies, data that would soon become the foundation for humanity's greatest military mobilization in 3 centuries. As her ship accelerated beyond Council monitoring range, Reed accessed the classified Lazarus protocols. The galaxy had spent centuries ensuring humans remained peaceful. They had forgotten why that was necessary in the first place. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. 3 days during which Reed pored over historical archives, studying ancient human conflicts, strategies that had been forbidden for generations, the elegant theories of asymmetric warfare, the brutal efficiency of combined arms tactics, concepts that had been academic exercises for centuries, preserved but never implemented. When her shuttle emerged from hyperspace, the familiar blue sphere of Earth came into view, but Reed's attention was drawn to what orbited beyond the Moon. There, hidden from commercial shipping lanes and diplomatic routes, floated massive orbital platforms, shipyards that, according to official records, had been decommissioned centuries ago. Welcome home, Commander. Admiral Zhang's voice came through as Reed approached Earth's defense perimeter. I trust your journey was illuminating. Those platforms were supposed to be dismantled, Reed said quietly. On paper, they were, Zhang replied. In reality, we converted them to research stations, perfectly legal under the treaty. If those research stations happen to maintain the capability to rapidly retool for shipbuilding, well, the treaty never specified what kind of research we could conduct. As Reed's shuttle docked at the orbital command center, she was struck by the activity surrounding her. Uniformed personnel moved with purpose, engineers and officers reviewing technical specifications on holographic displays. This wasn't a hasty response to her warning. This was an operation that had been in preparation for years, perhaps decades. Admiral Zhang met her at the airlock, older in person than her holographic projection suggested. 300 years of peace has made the galaxy forget what humanity is capable of, she said without preamble. But we never forgot. We hoped we'd never need to remember, but we kept the knowledge alive. The Council will see this as a betrayal, Reed warned. Perhaps, Zhang acknowledged. But I suspect they'll be too busy surviving to complain. Come with me. There's something you need to see. They traveled deep into the station, passing security checkpoints that required DNA verification and retinal scans. Finally, they entered a vast chamber where a holographic display showed real-time updates from probes scattered throughout the outer rim. The anomalies had grown, several now the size of small moons. 3 days ago, we lost contact with our monitoring station in the Hephaestus Nebula, Zhang explained. We sent a stealth drone to investigate. She gestured, and the display changed to show footage of a research outpost, or what remained of it. The station had been torn apart, not by weapons, but by what appeared to be gravitational forces that had warped the very structure of the facility. The personnel? Reed asked quietly. No survivors, John replied grimly. But we found this. The footage shifted to show something that made Reed's breath catch. A humanoid figure, except it wasn't exactly solid. Its form seemed to shift between states of matter, sometimes appearing as dense fog, sometimes crystalline. It moved with precision, examining the wreckage of the human outpost with what could only be described as methodical curiosity. What is that? We've designated them phantoms, Jung said. They appear to be scouts or advance forces for whatever's coming through those rifts. And they're not just curious. They're mapping our defenses, our population centers, our vulnerabilities. Reed watched as the entity in the recording suddenly looked directly at the drone's camera. Its face, if it could be called that, reconfigured into something approximating human features, as though attempting communication or mimicry. Then, with startling speed, it lunged toward the camera, and the feed went dead. The Council needs to see this, Reed insisted. We've sent the evidence through official channels, John replied. They've classified it as inconclusive. After centuries of peace, they've lost the capacity to recognize existential threats. But we haven't. She gestured broadly. Project Lazarus wasn't just about maintaining shipyards, Commander. It was about preserving the one thing that made humanity unique in the galaxy, our understanding of warfare. You want me to lead a military response, Reed said, the realization dawning. In violation of the treaty. Zhang's expression remained unyielding. I want you to command our first combat vessel in 3 centuries, if it becomes necessary. For now, we prepare, we monitor, and we hope I'm wrong about what's coming. Reed knew Zhang wasn't wrong. The evidence was too compelling, the pattern too deliberate. Something ancient and powerful was entering their galaxy, and if the Council wouldn't act, humanity would face a terrible choice. Honor a treaty and watch the galaxy fall, or remember their warrior past and risk becoming what the galaxy had always feared. As they stood in silence, an alarm blared through the command center. A lieutenant approached with urgency. Admiral, we've lost contact with the Paxari homeworld. All communication channels are dead. Zhang's gaze met Reed's. It seems the choice has been made for us. The Paxari weren't supposed to be targeted for another 2 weeks, Reed said, her mind racing. Which means we severely underestimated their capabilities and timeline, Zhang replied. Commander Reed, effective immediately, you're being reinstated to your military rank. The Earth Defense Force is officially on high alert. As Reed looked around the command center, she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. Humanity had kept the peace, honored their word, and maintained their isolation. But the galaxy was about to remember why humans had been feared in the first place, not because they were cruel or aggressive, but because when pushed to defend those they cared about, there were no lengths to which they would not go. The guardians of peace were about to become warriors once more. The awakening storm. The destruction of the Paxari homeworld wasn't a military strike. It was an erasure. Commander Ilara Reed stared at the sensor readings with a growing sense of horror. Where once a vibrant planet of philosophers and artists had thrived, there now existed only a grotesque distortion of space-time, as if reality itself had been folded and twisted until it broke. How many survived? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Unknown, replied Lieutenant Commander Sorensen, her tactical officer. We detected approximately 40 ships leaving the system before communications went dark. Mostly civilian vessels, research craft. Nothing with significant defensive capabilities. Reed closed her eyes briefly, thinking of the Paxari she had known. Gentle, curious beings who had spent millennia developing arts and philosophical traditions that were admired throughout the galaxy. They had been humanity's first true alien friends, defending Earth's admission to the Galactic Assembly when other species had advocated for quarantine. Now they were refugees, if they were lucky. Extinct, if they were not. "The Council can't ignore this," Reed said, straightening her shoulders. "Have we received any official response?" "Yes, Commander," said Communications Officer Chen. "The Council has issued an emergency declaration and called for the convening of the Defense Committee. They're requesting that all member species contribute to a unified response fleet." "A unified response fleet," Reed repeated, not bothering to hide her skepticism. "How many actual combat vessels does the Council currently maintain?" Admiral Zhang, who had been silently observing from her position near the tactical display, answered. 14 warships of various classes, most of them at least a century old. They're primarily used for ceremonial purposes and anti-piracy patrols in peaceful sectors. "And how many of these phantom entities have our sensors detected coming through the rifts?" Zhang's expression darkened. "At last count, over 200 large constructs, each potentially housing thousands of the entities we observed. And the rifts are still growing." Reed nodded grimly. "So the galaxy's peacekeepers are outgunned by at least 20 to 1, facing an enemy they don't understand, using ships designed for parades rather than combat. That's why we've accelerated Project Lazarus," Zhang said, gesturing for Reed to follow her. They exited the command center, entering a secure elevator that required both their biometric signatures to activate. "For 3 centuries, we've maintained the appearance of compliance with the Treaty of Proxima. Our official military has been limited to Earth's immediate defense and ceremonial units." The elevator descended deep into the station, far below the levels accessible to diplomatic personnel or foreign visitors. When the doors finally opened, Reed found herself facing an enormous manufacturing facility that extended for kilometers in every direction. Automated assembly lines were constructing what could only be described as weapons, advanced energy systems, propulsion units, and armored hull segments. Unofficially, Zhang continued as they walked along a catwalk overlooking the facility. "We've continued theoretical weapons research, tactical simulations, and limited production capabilities, all perfectly legal under the treaty's research exemptions." "This doesn't look limited to me," Reed observed. "That's because what you're seeing was fabricated within the last 72 hours, Zhang replied with a hint of pride. "Project Lazarus was never about secretly building a fleet that would have been detected. It was about maintaining the ability to rapidly transition from peaceful production to military manufacturing when needed." They reached the end of the catwalk, where a massive view screen showed real-time feeds from various production facilities throughout Earth's solar system. On Mars, asteroid mining operations were being converted to produce armored plating. The shipyards around Jupiter's moons were assembling modular components that could be rapidly combined into warships. "How long?" Reed asked. "Until we have a functional battle fleet. 4 days for the first vessels, 2 weeks for a force capable of meaningful intervention." Zhang's expression was grim. "The question is whether we have that much time." Reed's response was interrupted by an urgent communication from the command center. "Admiral, Commander, you need to see this." The main display shifted to show a live feed from the Galactic Assembly. The chamber was in chaos, with representatives shouting over one another as High Counselor Vexla attempted to maintain order. In the center of the room stood a holographic projection of a devastated world that Reed recognized as Talesian Prime, one of the galaxy's busiest trading hubs. "This attack occurred less than an hour ago," reported Officer Chen. "Unlike Paxari, the Talesians had planetary defense systems. They managed to transmit data before they were overwhelmed." The display shifted to show grainy footage from a Talesian defense platform. Massive black constructs, similar to what they had observed emerging from the rifts, hung in orbit around the planet. From each, smaller entities descended toward the surface, their forms shifting between states of matter as they breached the atmosphere. Where they touched down, reality seemed to warp. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes. The ground itself rippled like liquid. Talesians caught in these distortion fields suffered fates Reed couldn't bear to watch, their physical forms contorted as the fundamental forces holding matter together were manipulated. "These aren't just invaders," Zhang said quietly. They're reshaping our universe according to their physics, or returning it to its natural state, suggested Science Officer Bakari, who had joined them. Our analysis suggests these entities originate from a universe with different physical constants. They're not destroying our world so much as reconstructing them to match their native environment, which is just as deadly to us, Reed noted grimly. The feed from the assembly showed Vexilla finally establishing order. The Council has authorized the deployment of all available defense forces, she announced, her tendrils rigid with stress. All member species with combat-capable vessels are ordered to converge at the following coordinates for a unified defense of the core systems. A stunned murmur went through the assembly as the coordinates appeared. The Council was planning to stand at the Archimedes cluster, barely halfway between the advancing phantoms and the most populated systems of the galaxy. They're conceding the outer rim, Reed realized. They're going to sacrifice dozens of worlds to buy time. Zhang's expression hardened. And even then, they'll fail. Their forces are inadequate. Their tactics outdated. They haven't fought a real war in centuries. Unlike us, Reed said softly. Unlike us, Zhang agreed. We never stopped preparing, never stopped thinking about how to fight. It was our curse, and now it may be the galaxy's salvation. She turned to face Reed directly. The Council hasn't requested Earth's assistance yet. They still think of us as a minor power, bound by the treaty. But soon they'll have no choice. When that moment comes, I need to know where you stand, Commander. Reed thought about the Paxari, about their millennia of philosophical wisdom, now reduced to whatever had escaped on those 40 ships. She thought about the Treaty of Proxima, meant to protect the galaxy from human aggression, now possibly dooming it by keeping humanity's strength leashed when it was most needed. I stand with Earth, she said firmly, and with any species that wishes to survive what's coming. Zhang nodded, satisfied. Then you should see what you'll be commanding. They took another elevator, this one descending even deeper into the station. When the doors opened, Reed found herself in an enormous hangar bay, dimly lit except for spotlights illuminating a single vessel. Unlike the organic, flowing designs favored by most galactic civilizations, this ship was distinctly human in its construction. Angular, functional, with no concessions to aesthetic considerations. Its hull was a dark, non-reflective material that seemed to swallow light. Weapon emplacements were visible along its length, currently retracted but clearly devastating when deployed. The EDF Prometheus, Zhang said with undisguised pride. The first true human warship built in 3 centuries. Designed not for peacekeeping or diplomacy, but for what humans have always excelled at, warfare. Reed approached the vessel slowly, taking in its dimensions, its capabilities. How long has this been under construction? In physical form. 72 hours, Zhang replied. In simulation and design. Decades. Every advance in materials science, propulsion, energy systems, all theoretically applied to military applications, waiting for the moment they would be needed. Reed placed her hand against the hull, feeling the cool, smooth surface. And I'm to command her. If you accept, Zhang confirmed. The Prometheus will lead our response, whether the Council requests our help or not. Before Reed could respond, another emergency communication came through. The tactical display updated to show new attacks. 3 more systems under assault, all with the same pattern of spatial distortion and matter reconfiguration. The Phantoms are accelerating their advance, Reed noted, studying the pattern. They're not following any recognizable strategic doctrine. Because they're not conquering, Zhang replied grimly. They're terraforming, or whatever the equivalent is when you're changing a universe's physical laws rather than just a planet's environment. In the assembly feed still running on a secondary screen, the panic was visible. Representatives from affected worlds were demanding immediate assistance, while species from the core systems were arguing for concentration of forces to protect the most populated regions. Admiral, Reed said quietly, we don't have time to wait for the Council's request. Every hour we delay means another world distorted beyond recognition. Zhang studied Reed's face. You're suggesting we break the treaty unilaterally. I'm suggesting we fulfill its true purpose, Reed countered. The Treaty of Proxima was meant to protect galactic peace. There can be no peace if the galaxy itself is transformed into something that can't support our forms of life. The Admiral was silent for a long moment. If we act without Council authorization, we risk being branded as aggressors. The very thing the treaty was designed to prevent. If we don't act, Reed replied, there may be no one left to brand us anything. Their discussion was interrupted by a priority communication. The holographic projector activated to show Vexilla herself, her tendrils drooping with exhaustion. Admiral Zhang, she said without preamble. The Council requests. No, the Council requires Earth's assistance. Zhang exchanged a glance with Reed before responding. High Counselor, Earth stands ready to help. But we must be clear. Effective assistance would require capabilities beyond what the Treaty of Proxima permits. Vexilla's large eyes blinked slowly. The Council is prepared to grant a temporary exemption from certain provisions of the treaty, given the extraordinary nature of the threat. With respect, Zhang replied, this isn't a matter for exemptions or permissions. Either Earth commits its full capabilities to this fight, or we don't commit at all. And our full capabilities would require the treaty's military restrictions to be not just temporarily lifted, but permanently reconsidered. Reed could see the conflict in Vexilla's expression, the desperate need for help battling against centuries of ingrained caution regarding human military power. The Council cannot simply void a cornerstone treaty because of one crisis, Vexilla protested. Then the Council will face this crisis alone, Zhang said firmly. We've seen the footage from Paxari and Telasian Prime. We know what we're facing. Earth will defend itself, but we will not commit to a half-measure response that ties our hands while worlds burn. For a moment, Reed thought Vexilla would refuse. Then, almost imperceptibly, the High Counselor's posture changed. A subtle slump of her shoulders, a different rhythm to the movement of her tendrils. Very well, she said finally. The Council hereby acknowledges that the military restrictions of the Treaty of Proxima are suspended for the duration of this crisis. Earth is authorized to deploy whatever forces it deems necessary to combat the existential threat we now face. Zhang nodded solemnly. Earth accepts this responsibility. We will immediately dispatch vessels to coordinate with Council forces. Vessels. Vexilla's tendrils twitched in surprise. The Council was under the impression that Earth maintained only ceremonial ships, as required by the treaty. Zhang's expression remained impassive. High Counselor, humanity has always prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. You'll find our resources adequate to the task at hand. After the communication ended, Reed turned to Zhang. She suspects. Of course she does, Zhang replied. But right now, she needs us more than she needs to maintain the fiction that humanity has been fully demilitarized for 3 centuries. She gestured toward the Prometheus. The ship will be ready for deployment in 12 hours. I'm authorizing the launch of our first response fleet, the Prometheus, plus the 5 escort vessels currently nearing completion. 6 ships against hundreds of those constructs. Reed asked. 6 ships to buy time, Zhang corrected. To gather intelligence, to test weaknesses, and most importantly, to show the galaxy that humanity remembers how to fight. She handed Reed a command chip, the physical authorization that would transfer control of the Prometheus to her. This is what we've prepared for, Commander. Not conquest, not domination, but the defense of life itself. Reed accepted the chip, feeling its weight in her palm, a physical token representing the end of humanity's enforced pacifism. For 3 centuries, they had been the galaxy's pariahs, barely tolerated because of the threat they had once posed. Now that same capacity for warfare might be all that stood between civilization and extinction. As she returned to her quarters to prepare for command, Reed reviewed what little data they had on the Phantoms. Their technology, if it could be called that, operated on principles that seemed to defy conventional physics. They didn't so much destroy as rewrite, changing the fundamental rules of reality in their wake. How did one fight an enemy that could alter the laws of physics? The question haunted her as she packed her few personal belongings. The treaty had forbidden humans from warfare, but it had never managed to excise their talent for it. Now, after centuries of peace, humanity would remind the galaxy why that prohibition had been necessary, and why, perhaps, it had been a mistake. The awakening storm was upon them, and humanity would meet it not with diplomacy or caution, but with the full force of the military genius that had made them feared throughout the stars. 12 hours later, the Prometheus and its escort vessels broke Earth orbit, accelerating toward the coordinates where the Council's meager defense fleet was assembling. As the ships entered hyperspace, Reed stood on the command deck, watching the stars streak past. Behind her, a crew that had trained all their lives for a war they had hoped would never come prepared for humanity's return to the battlefield. Combat systems online and functioning at optimal parameters, reported Tactical Officer Sorensen. Weapons are hot but safe. Engineering reports all propulsion systems nominal, added Lieutenant Park. The new gravimetric stabilizers are performing beyond expected specifications. Reed nodded, taking her place in the command chair. Set course for the Archimedes cluster, maximum sustainable speed, and open a channel to all vessels in our battle group. As the communications officer complied, Reed considered her words carefully. What she said next would be remembered. The first official orders given to a human combat fleet in 3 centuries. She nodded to Tactical Officer Sorensen, who sent the proposed formation, a layered asymmetric arrangement that placed the most capable vessels at key intercept points while using the others for sensor coverage and quick response. Vex'Lathun studied the proposal, his crystalline features impossible to read. This formation, it lacks balance. Some sectors would have significantly more protection than others. Because some sectors are more likely to be targeted, Reed explained. Based on the data from previous attacks, the Phantoms prioritize worlds with the highest energy outputs. In this cluster, that means Archimedes II and V would be primary targets. You cannot know this with certainty, the Ixthalar protested. No, Reed admitted, but uncertainty is the nature of warfare. We must make probabilistic assessments and allocate resources accordingly. War is not about probabilities, Vex'Lathun replied stiffly. It is about principles, about standing together in unity against aggression. Reed resisted the urge to sigh. This, she realized, was the fundamental disconnect. The Council viewed warfare as a moral exercise, a test of their collective resolve and shared values. Humans understood it as a ruthlessly practical endeavor, where good intentions meant nothing without effective strategy. Commander, she tried again, I respect the Council's experience in maintaining peace, but my species has a particular history with warfare. I strongly urge you to consider our tactical recommendations. The Ixthalar was silent for a moment. I will consult with the other fleet commanders, he said finally. But I must warn you, Earth's eagerness for combat has not been forgotten. Some among us question whether your assistance comes with hidden costs. The only cost of ignoring our advice, Reed replied evenly, may be measured in lives lost. We'll stand by for your decision. After the communication ended, Reed turned to Sorensen. Status of our combat systems. All weapons platforms at full readiness.